Hey there, it's Mango, host of Part-Time Genius, co-founder of Mental Floss, and like many of you, I'm one of the 21 million people that have picked up gardening in the past 6 months. That's why I'm hosting the brand new podcast, Humans Growing Stuff, brought to you by iHeartMedia and your friends at Miracle Grow. Join me on a green adventure as we talk with experts, friends, and surprise guests, and hear what gardening means to them. Listen to Humans Growing Stuff on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
From iHeartRadio, it's the Hey Pal podcast.
Hey Pal.
Hey Pal.
With Jared and Davo.
We're going to be talking sports.
We're so starved for sports. I literally just fought the UPS guy and filmed it. So I'm going to put it online.
We're going to be talking entertainment. Julian Edelman, it's football movies. Who's advancing between Jerry Maguire and Waterboy?
I think you got to go Waterboy.
Oh, we've got an upset! Who should we call next, Dave?
We're calling everybody.
It's the Hey Pal podcast. Series premiere September 29th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Inside the Studio, presented by iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Joe Levy. Okay, so probably none of you are surprised that the sales of things like puzzles, sweatpants, and pajamas have been booming during the pandemic. But it was news a few weeks back that the sales of guitars was surging as well. So it turns out that, yeah, strumming is soothing, but learning to play the guitar or any new instrument is good for you. The New York Times talked with a neuroscientist, Daniel Levitin, who wrote a book called This Is Your Brain on Music, and he explained that taking up a new instrument requires you to grow new neural pathways. And I think we can all agree we'd like as many new neural pathways as we can lay our brains on. Anyway, if you did buy a new guitar, you actually had the opportunity to take some lessons from the guest on this episode of the home edition of the show, James Bay, who's been spending 2 days a week during lockdown on Instagram teaching fans how to play his songs. We started the home edition of Inside the Studio to let you know how the pandemic has impacted the lives of artists and how it's affecting the way they make music, but this is just a great example of how one musician decided to combat the isolation we've all had to deal with by giving back. And James Bay told our quarantine correspondent, Jordan Runtagh, all about the album that he was finishing in Nashville just before lockdown, working with the producer Dave Cobb, who's made amazing records with artists like Jason Isbell and Brandi Carlile. James also talked about how his music has taken a turn towards the positive. So if you enjoy this episode, be sure to check out the iHeartRadio podcast that Jordan hosts. It's called Rivals, Music's Greatest Feuds, and it's available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jordan Runtagh, but enough about me. My guest today is a British singer-songwriter whose soulful voice has been compared to the late, great Jeff Buckley. His explosive debut in 2015 earned him 3 Grammy nominations and global hits like Let It Go and Hold Back the River. Earlier this year, he went down to Nashville's historic RCA Studio A to work on his upcoming 3rd album. And in July, we heard a taste when he dropped his latest single, the sensual Chew on My Heart. I'm so thrilled to welcome the extremely suave Mr. James Bay.
Thank you. Wow, kind words. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm good. It's a strange time. I'm sure we'll kind of start there one way or another, but it's still nice to be talking to you.
Oh, it's so great to have you. I mean, as you said, the last few months have been tough on all of us. How have you been staying grounded and feeling good?
Well, it was an interesting one because I got home from Nashville and 24 hours later, lockdown began in the UK for the first time. So that was it was such an amazing start to the year. I was writing right up until I went to the studio for this 3rd record. And then I travelled over to Nashville. We did what we did, had a great time. I came home and that happened. And there was a beat in time where everybody, including the music industry, kind of went, can we go on? Can we go forward? Or is this kind of it? And are we going to have to weather quite an intense storm? But I suppose I'm feeling good today. Obviously, that was a few months back now that lockdown stuff started in anybody's life, definitely in mine here in the UK. And I'm feeling good because it was only a beat in the music industry that we felt like we couldn't go forward. Obviously, live is still very tricky, playing shows and stuff, but I've obviously been able to put out a new single despite the times, and that is really exciting. So I'm feeling pretty good.
Oh, that's so good to hear. Your new single, True in My Heart, which is... I don't think I've ever heard the expression of love phrased quite that way in music before. Tell me about that song.
Yeah, no one seems to have, and neither had I. I haven't been keeping it a secret. I suppose that was actually a really exciting moment. It is, I think, for any songwriter, when you feel like you might have coined a phrase, like kind of for the first time, and there's no telling whether it'll catch on at all, but it jumped out at me. I was sat with my guitar, sort of singing around kind of melodic ideas, any kind of version of la la la, and sort of shaping vowel sounds and never quite saying complete words. And what sounded, I suppose, like a phrase, chew on my heart, came out and it formed itself. And I kind of, in the room, I went, chew on my heart. That, whatever it was, I said to myself, and I remember this well, I have to have it. I have to turn it into, and this is a pretty sort of textbook moment for any songwriter, whether it's a phrase you've heard before or not. If you're attached to it, if it's attractive, then you want to work it, unless you've already come to the sort of songwriting situation with something to say and something you want to write about. The other way of doing things is this one, where you go, okay, can that apply to something real, something that's real for me, something that I really want to kind of get out in the form of song. And I was able to do that. And I'm really glad, because it's a pretty zany sort of phrase and title, and those ones are always the best ones to sort of go with.
There was an interview you gave recently in the UK where you said in the past you'd been writing from a place of sadness. I guess I'm thinking of your EP, Oh My Messy Mind. Mm-hmm. What's responsible for this new bout of musical optimism?
Oh, good question. Because it's true. I found, even on occasions where I was feeling pretty level and pretty up, I just enjoyed kind of drawing from a place of heartbreak and a place of sadness. And there's something that seems to sort of feel like it means so much in a songwriting environment, in a songwriting capacity, when you draw from that stuff. So this has been a sort of surprise to me. I made all this music, and I only realised after, when the lockdown thing began and I had this suddenly natural moment to listen back, that I'd drawn from this kind of positive place. It was quite a private place as well. I've been with my girlfriend for 13 years. We were kids, really, when we sort of got together. We were definitely friends beforehand, from the same small town. We've been through it all, through thick and thin, through the absolute roller coaster that life is for anybody, but life has certainly been for me and for us, through, meeting record labels and touring the world and all of that stuff. And she's the rock, I know it's she's not Dwayne Johnson. She's my rock. Imagine. She's and I found myself paying tribute to that, and I'd never, like I say, it's a private part of my life, so I've always been careful with it, but it couldn't help itself, and it came out through songs. And I'm in love with the music, so I'm really kind of pleased I did it, even though I sort of almost told myself, without ever telling myself in the past, that I wouldn't, just for the sake of maintaining a bit of privacy. But stuff, when it's got to come out, it gets out. And
that has to be tough. I mean, you've decided to be this public figure, and I imagine your girlfriend Lucy did not. And so,
absolutely,
is that difficult to balance that?
Yes and no. You're right. You're absolutely right. I signed up for all of this, and you're absolutely right. She didn't. But as long as you're well aware of that, and I think that as long as we communicate that to each other, and we constantly, and it's constantly kind of a conversation, then it becomes normal and okay that I signed up for it and she didn't. And it's a much deeper understanding is had of that. It can be a strange one to navigate. It can be a difficult one to navigate. It's never completely straightforward. It's sometimes easier than other times, and sometimes harder. But I guess it's testament to how tuned into each other we are, and how we are one thing. We are a unit, and it's testament to all of that I'm able to, at this point, sort of let it into my work, because that's a real crossing of wires in many respects as well, but let it into my work in this way. It's never that's also never a kind of clean-cut thing. Work and life, when you do what I do, they blend, whether you want them to or not.
And she also played, I've heard, a big role in your own musical history. She encouraged you, right? At the beginning.
Massively, yeah.
Of your career.
She did, massively. I mean, to the extent that we met in this little small town that we're both from, and I was playing in sort of bands, and like I was always in a band with my brother, and then another very, very close friend of mine, Tom, who is essentially a brother. I mean, we're not blood related, but we might as well be. And he still plays bass in my band today. We've known each other since we were about 3 years old. It was a small town, tight-knit sort of atmosphere. And we were playing, and we all met when we were teenagers. And Lucy was, excited to go and see bands in town, like, and sort of follow local music. And so one way or another, we all became friends. And she always thought it was cool in that respect. But there was a moment where, because this is at the time when school is still a big, real thing for everybody. And what's happening with that? And is someone going to get a job? Are you going to, how are we going to... There's that moment when you're a teenager when your parents aren't giving you kind of an allowance or anything anymore. And it's all about like, well, there's a supermarket that's employing people. And it becomes all of that. And as we moved through those years, I was always most hungry to hold on to playing music one way or another. What I'm trying to say is Lucy essentially got serious about it before I did. As far as me wanting to kind of... She would say to me, we'd be sat in on a sort of weeknight watching TV and maybe like watching a gig or something on TV or see some music thing. Once again, I'd say, yeah, I really want that to be me one day. God, I'm so inspired and I could do that. And she would kind of turn to me and go, okay, well, there are a couple of pubs in town that have an open mic night happening right now. Why are you sitting on the couch? If you're really serious, surely you should. And it was always encouragement. It was never like a negative thing. It was always like, if you're serious about it, make some moves, go and do it. And that's priceless sort of moment in my life, really.
At what point did you go from being somebody who loved music and a fan of music to actually writing it and making it yourself? Was there a decisive moment or just sort of gradually happened?
It gradually happened, but in a way... There was a decisive moment as soon as I picked up an instrument that I didn't just want to learn other people's stuff. Boy, is it vital that you're learning other people's stuff and working out how things are done and sort of opening your mind to how you could do things yourself. But like I said about me and Tom and my brother Alex, like when we were little kids, when we were very young teenagers and just starting out, going from listening to music our whole lives to starting to try to play instruments, there was lots of other kids in town doing the same thing, as you can imagine. Every generation has loads and loads of kids trying it out. We were really one of the only bunches of kids who were interested in original material. We were willing. And I didn't even realise at the time, I only recognise in hindsight, it's of course, we had this kind of blind sort of confidence and faith in ourselves that if we turned up with something original, it was already awesome because it was original. And I'm sort of so glad that nobody ever really got to us and said, it's like barely 5 out of 10, but good for you for trying. We believed it was great. Everybody else they could only handle doing covers because they thought we're safe if we're playing songs that people know. And there's something really wise about that. We, I guess, weren't so wise. So, we did covers and we really enjoyed playing covers to people. And obviously the reaction was always amazing, whether we were in a bar or a pub or whatever. But it was from moment one that I and my brother and all of us, we were willing to just make stuff up and call those our songs and then rehearse them and go and play them. There was essentially no worry about that. We sort of thought, well, if we want to be the Rolling Stones, that's what they did, so we've got to do it too.
I'm Jennifer Palmieri, host of a new podcast from The Recount called Just Something About Her. After working on 5 presidential campaigns, I thought women could achieve the same success as men if they played by the rules. Then 2016 happened. In my podcast, Just Something About Her, I'll talk with women CEOs, athletes, politicians, and more. So together we can create our own rules. Listen to Just Something About Her on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All of us in America have a duty to vote.
Don't boo. Vote.
Voting may be the cornerstone of our democracy, but the reality of how voting works in America and who gets to do it is not as fair or clear-cut as we like to tell ourselves. I'm Katie Couric, and this is Turnout, a podcast exploring America's voting record. With the help of experts, activists, and politicians, We're going to talk about the ways voters have been kept out of the system and how to ensure that everyone can participate in our democracy. Turnout launches October 1st. Find it on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.
Now, your most recent album, as you said, it's filled with optimism. I assume that this was done prior. Have you been working on the album in lockdown, or is it completely done and ready to roll before all this went down?
The only stuff that we're having to do in lockdown is mixing. Usually, I'd be in the company of the person mixing and sort of putting my 2 cents in and helping out, but can't do that. Can't travel in that capacity. So I started writing this album towards the beginning, sort of middle of 2019, sort of springtime. I think is when I'd say I really sort of was starting to sort of get my head down and think about it and write for a third record. But so I was doing that all through the rest of 2019 and from the very beginning of 2020, and really right up until the last week. There was suddenly there was a few conversations went on, and I was made aware that this brilliant man, Dave Cobb, who's a great producer in Nashville in America, was keen to work together, and there was a window of time. I essentially thought, well, let's just go for it. I feel great about the songs. He'd heard some of the songs and felt great about them. Let's just give it a shot and see what happens. There's always a little sort of element of kind of throw caution to the wind and sort of gamble a little bit and just try. So yeah, I really rolled from writing right into Nashville and recording. Spent about 5 weeks doing that there, and we got everything done, even though for the last couple of weeks the atmosphere in the world changed, and we felt it even in our bubble in the studio. So it was all written very much before all this lockdown stuff, but it's been interesting the ways in which it feels like it resonates with the current times as I listen to the songs now in this global context.
What was it like working with Dave Cobb? I know it sounds like he had you do a lot of tracking live and do a lot of full takes live. What was that like? Was that like, all right, lights on, got to hit it?
Right, it really was like that. I think so, and I really am so grateful that I worked with him particularly for those reasons. Dave is willing to, speaking of almost sort of blind faith and being willing to kind of go with your gut. Dave's extremely experienced and well-versed, but he still sort of wholeheartedly believes you just got to play, and you play till it feels right, and you don't labour it. You can do 15 takes, you can do 25 takes, you can do 50 takes, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely fine. Whoever you are, whatever you want to do, it's just as valid. But I love Dave's spirit is, we probably got it in takes 2 to 4, but we'll do 5 or 6 just to feel okay. But then we're moving on, and like that. So that was something I was really drawn to, and he goes and finds fantastic musicians, and I let him very much in producer capacity, obviously do all of that stuff as well, assemble a band. The big one from a pop perspective, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever your music is, if it's in one way or another pop, you will record to a click track. And there's people out there listening who may not know what that is, and there's people who will. It just means that you are a dedicated tempo that doesn't shift. Usually when you play and you get to the chorus and the music and the momentum are driving things, you'll probably speed up a little bit when you get to the chorus. Not too noticeable, but these days people play only to a click so that the tempo doesn't shift and you're locked in. There is something wonderful, and Dave is a massive advocate for this. There is something wonderful and that has so much spirit about not playing to a click. Let the atmosphere lead and drive you. Let the spirit of a song, of a chorus, make you put your foot on the gas a tiny bit more. And that was a sort of, I was kind of following Dave into that place. It seemed like a darkness to me, but he knew it was okay, so I followed him. And I really enjoyed working with him for that as well. And let me tell you, sorry, I've gone on about this one, but let me tell you this. I went into the experience with Dave in Nashville knowing I was so up for that. Actually doing it and sitting back and listening to takes and noticing with my sort of 21st century pop ears that like sometimes it's sped up in the... I was really uneasy. I haven't even really sort of talked to Dave about this yet. I was kind of uneasy, and I was trying to sort of dedicatedly follow him. And as I listen back today, as we're finishing off mixes, and it's the same moments of sort of speeding up or whatever, or slowing down, and it's all going very much with the flow, I love it. It's so human. It's so real, and the momentum is so natural, and it ebbs and flows so wonderfully. So I'm glad I trusted him and followed him. You know, he knows what he's doing.
He's got the soul on those takes. And speaking of soul, you're in RCA Studio A. Tell me about that. I'm a huge music history buff. What was that feeling like?
So, for one, you're standing in a building that is about 1.5 meters away from another building. That building is RCA Studio B. That place, Google that for a historic list of Elvis Presley bangers. That's where Studio B is, where all that stuff went down. And it's a bit of a museum these days, but you can go in there and I think it's still used. And it was very cool. We got a moment or two to step in there and sort of see what was going on. But Studio A, which gave me the sort of Abbey Road Studio 2 feels, because it's this beautiful big room, one big open space. There's a control room slightly separate. And there's this like big lovely staircase in the room, so you can sort of do all sorts of things with sort of microphone height. Nowadays, people take their laptop to any room on the planet, they open it up, they've got Pro Tools, they've got Logic, they record, and they can get exactly the same sounds wherever they are.
All the plugins and...
Right. Back then, they didn't have that. So Chet Atkins decided to build the same room, the spec being exactly the same around the world. There was like 7 or 8 of them. I think it was like 4 or 5 in America, 3 or 4 in Europe. This is the only one left. The one in Nashville is the only one left. All of the rest of them were knocked down. But I remember when we went in at the very beginning, and I was just hanging out with Dave for an afternoon, being in the space, talking about plans and stuff. And he told me a little about the history, and he said, yeah, they've made all sorts of music in here. He said, probably about where you're standing, sometime in the sort of late 70s, Dolly Parton was standing there. And in the same 3 hours, she sang down, I Will Always Love You and Jolene.
No pressure, no pressure.
I was like, sure, no pressure. That's just the rest of her life completely made. So they made so much brilliant. I mean, and just more recently, I'm sure you've heard this one, but there's a fantastic record called By the Way, I Forgive You by Brandi Carlile that Dave made that. It won all sorts of Grammys, and it's a beautiful piece of music, collection of music, and that was made in that room as well. So loads of great stuff's been made in there.
Oh, what an incredible place.
Crazy.
You've talked about, there's a great video on YouTube of you talking about Eric Clapton's Layla being a huge influence on you as a young student of music. Who are some other classic rock icons that really, really inspired you when you were younger?
There's lots. There's lots and lots. From just a sort of guitar player perspective, it was Eric Clapton, it was Stevie Ray Vaughan, it was Robbie Robertson in the band, massively. The Rolling Stones were huge for me. Later in my life, into my teens, into my late teens, I finally came around to the Beatles. But of course, when we all start out, it's one or the other, Beatles or Stones.
And you're a Stones guy.
For most of us. Yeah, my dad was like super duper a Stones guy, so I got that way faster. Bruce Springsteen all day long. I love Bruce Springsteen's music. And then I suppose it's less classic rock, but just from the same era, it's all the soul. It's every Aretha Franklin record. It's every Ray Charles record. All of that stuff. Since I was like 15 years old, it's all I've listened to. And to the extent that like I go to that stuff in honesty more than a lot of the music that's been released in sort of my, in the 21st century. But, there's obviously loads of phenomenal music from Kings of Leon to Adele. It's all inspired by some of that great older stuff, and it's all very much for and from the present day. So it mixes and it changes, I
was going to ask you, what have you been listening to during lockdown? Because I don't know about you, but I've been listening to things that I haven't listened to since I was in high school, since I was a teenager.
Sure.
It's like I want something familiar. Have you been feeling that way?
One of the things I've really enjoyed, this is a little bit more for us folks over here, but I think people in America know a little bit about an artist called Paolo Nutini.
Oh, yeah.
He's a Scottish guy. Oh my goodness. That was real big music for me when I was like 13, 14, 15. I mean, that was the first show I ever saw in a big proper venue, was his show in 2005, I think. I've been loving Haim's new album. It's their 3rd album. The guitar sounds on that are everything. I mean, the songs are fantastic, and the performances and the production, and there's such a great team of people. But just as a guitar geek, the guitar sounds are amazing. There's also a great artist called Phoebe Bridgers.
Oh, yeah.
Love Phoebe Bridgers' music. She's brilliant. A big fan of her. So all sorts of different things. I'm always going back to, again, it's some older stuff. Like I'll always go back to All Things Must Pass is a great George Harrison record. Game changer. And obviously on Friday, this is super fresh, but on Friday, Taylor Swift put her new music out. And like, I gave it a couple rounds, you know, in sort of peripherally, kind of had it on the side of the room, and like, it was cool. But I just was driving around earlier this morning, and that song, that Cardigan song, ooh, that's serious stuff. There's a chorus in there that is forever. It's for the ages. So that hit me. That finally hit me this morning, sort of 4 days after it came out. Big fan of that.
Oh, an incredible album. Have you been feeling productive musically during lockdown? Have you been writing?
All right, let me tell you. So yes, is the answer, and I'm all about sort of pushing forward in that capacity. But I humbly write on a guitar or maybe a piano, and use my sort of phone's kind of voice notes app. That's all I got. I don't know how to use Pro Tools. I don't know how to use Logic. I just don't. I wish I could, and I love the people that can, and they're amazing. But I haven't got the sort of patience or the brain for sort of that degree of technology until I found that, this sounds like such a massive plug, but there's this thing called the Spire by Isotope. It's like a 8-track recorder, and you sort of control it with an app. You don't have to, but you control it with an app on your phone, and it's limited, and I love it for that. And you can, it records like, you know, they're proper sound like files, like it's only 8 tracks, but you can finish it up and do a little mix of it yourself. And send it off to someone who's got Pro Tools or Logic, and they can do all sorts of things with it. They can take the files and like totally sort of use it and like make them into a proper record. But I've really enjoyed, as far as writing in lockdown, I've been able to sort of make slightly fancier but still very homemade demos using this thing. And because I had an 8-track when I was a teenager with my brother, and this is my new version of that, and I love it.
Are you superstitious at all when you write? Is there like an instrument you always use, or a place in your house you always write, or a time of day, or is it just whenever?
Good question. I'm only superstitious as far as, this isn't a superstition. I always am trying to do something else. Because as an instrumentalist, you know, when you play an instrument is what I'm trying to say, and the better you get at it, you get into ruts. You always pick it up. You always pick up a guitar and do something in E, or do something in G, or so, you know. And on a piano, you might jump on and always do something in C. And so I'm always trying. It's not so much a superstition. I just always try, if I can, to. It's hard when you're so familiar on an instrument to sort of step out of, you know, a habit. And then the other thing is, like, I'm not very good at beginning anything. Or even committing to beginning anything in earshot of anyone else.
Oh.
I sort of need to be... I mean, I co-write, and I do it in that capacity, but there's sort of an unwritten, unspoken law that is we're both in the same vulnerable, fragile place of, like, anything could be anything. But generally, I like to be very sort of solitary and solo when I'm dipping my toe into the pool. You know... I don't know. I like to be as sort of in the furthest corner of the house if I can.
I was going to say, yeah, you've worked with Ryan Tedder, Julia Michaels. You work with some incredible songwriters. Tell me about working with Brandon Flowers.
I mean, where do we start? Brandon, you know, I look at him as like a young legend. He's kind of he's already legend status. He's already sort of icon status, you know, in the way that I look up to, and people 20, 30 years older than me look up to Bruce Springsteen, for example. Brandon is like a sort of new age one of those to me, and I think to so many people. It was a pleasure to get to write with him. And we had no agenda going in. That was nice. You know, it wasn't, hey, are we writing for you? Are we writing for me? It was kind of, let's write and see who it fits. It felt like it was for me coming away, in truth. We ended up building off a verse idea that I had that I guess he thought was very much mine. I suppose lyrically it was kind of mine. So he was okay with that. And it was just... It's tough, you know, because when you're writing with someone, you are equals. Everyone's equal in the room, and everyone's got to throw as much as they can at the wall, see what sticks. But sometimes I catch myself just watching him throw stuff at the wall, in that sort of hypothetical way, because it's so cool to see that, to me, slightly sort of legendary process. You know, he's done that for so many massive songs now, and he's co-written and he's not co-written. You know, it's varied. It doesn't matter. He's written all sorts of brilliant music, so. It was inspiring, enormously inspiring, slightly overwhelming initially, but he was great. You know, he's a great guy, very, very, very accommodating, but very dedicated to the craft. So there's so much to learn whilst, like, in flight. You know, you're sort of hands on the thing, but, like, you got to keep checking over your shoulder to see how it's done at the same time, because he really knows.
Will this be on your upcoming third album, or still figuring that out?
I'm not sure. I know it applies. I know this song applies to me and I do hope will be released. And there's no pressure from sort of anybody in any other corner of the room. But I guess my mind works in a sort of, these songs are a thing together. They should go out together. And I'm not sure that one fits in there.
Yeah.
But it applies somewhere, one way or another. It will be heard.
What's the latest with your upcoming album? Do you have a release window for that scheduled yet?
No release date beyond, the plan is 2020. So that's exciting. But we the first single's just come out. There will be another, and then there's no sort of plan beyond that yet. And I think that's as much to do with we still music currently lives in a world where we're waiting to see how things open up again, unfold again. And how, so no one wants to go racing forward, but no one wants to come lagging behind and have not sort of done anything. So it's a bit touch and go, but hey, we live in a world where music can get put out still. So I'm doing as much of that as I can, and there will be an album.
A ravenous pandemic, a ruinous recession, protests, riots, racial strife, police brutality, and yes, Donald Trump. America in 2020 feels like apocalypse now, again. I'm John Heilman, and in Hell and High Water, I'll explore this moment in a series of raw and real conversations with the people who shape our culture. Hell and High Water is a podcast from The Recount. Listen to Hell and High Water on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Powerful and ancient, they exist right alongside us, in their own dimensions, their own tribes, and their own kingdoms. Some say they are the eternal mortal enemy of mankind. Others say they're so similar to us that we can befriend them. Like us, they're born and they die, they fall in love and have children, they hate and they destroy. But in truth, they are nothing like us. Invisible but as real as the smokeless flame that they're created out of, they are the Hidden Djinn. Brought to you by iHeartRadio and Aaron Mahnke's Grim and Mild, and written and narrated by me, Rabia Chaudhry, the new podcast, The Hidden Djinn, journeys into a world that few may be aware of, but has existed since the dawn of time. The Hidden Djinn, once worshipped and always feared. Join me to find out why. Binge all the episodes of The Hidden Djinn on Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Something obviously you can't be on the road right now, but you've been connecting with fans in this really cool way. You've been giving guitar lessons on Instagram. What's been the response like for that? That's so cool.
It's been very cool to do that, and I wasn't like Mr. Social Media before lockdown. I wasn't like a regular Instagram liver, and there was just a big hole formed when lockdown began, where interaction almost sort of dropped to zero. So I very much went, how can I? Can I? How can I? It's social media is a big old echo chamber as well, where not to criticize it exactly, but one person says something sort of striking or alarming or even just provocative, and then the whole place goes nuts. And I just wanted to come in a little more sort of unarmed and a bit more kind of like chill.
It's not a lot of chill on social media.
There's not a load of chill, and for better and for worse, like there's not a load, but I'm an entertainer. I jump up on stage. I'm a bit of a storyteller maybe. That's kind of all I really can do, and play music and play instruments. So I thought, can I apply that version of myself in any way? Because social media is a place for me, regarding me, social media is a place for my fans. So I asked the question, can I give them anything? And I taught guitar when I was 18 years old for about a year. So I thought, well, maybe I can sort of break down in a guitar teacher capacity how I play my songs, how I play them when I wrote them, how I play them live, how I play them when I play them just solo acoustic. So I started doing that. I started doing these live lessons every day at 5 p.m. sort of London time. People seem to really enjoy them. We've done like 24 at this point. in like 3 months. So it's been cool to sort of interact and connect with everybody. And it's become as kind of legit a lesson as it's supposed to be. It's become a bit of a hang. And it's nice that it exists between those two things, you know.
Do you still have your first guitar?
I do. My parents, it's at their house. I don't actually have it with me, in honesty. And it's fine. It's not like I don't like it. It's just I got a few more. And I don't know. I can't have them all in the same place because I don't have enough room.
What's your main one now? Is it the Epiphone 66 Century?
The Century, yeah. It's still kind of the main one, in honesty. I have a few different things kicking around that I'm playing a lot. I have a Gibson J50, a 1964 J50 that I've had for a long time now that I play a lot. It's not too long of a story, but Dave Cobb has so many fantastic guitars.
I bet.
As you can imagine, every guitar is just dreamy. And I gravitated towards many of them when I got to the studio. There was a Fender Jag that just looked great, so I picked it up and it felt great. And we were doing a song, and we got a great first take. I think the intention from my perspective was to do a few takes, but after I kind of played the guitar before we did the take, and me and Dave sort of looked at each other like, guitar sounds good. And then we did the take, and we finished it. It was the first take. We finished it. Everybody stopped, and I looked at Dave like, that sounded pretty, like the guitar sounds great, and that take was pretty killer. And he just like got up and walked over to me, and he shook my hand. He said, "That was the one, and congratulations, that thing's yours."
Yeah.
And it was a 1963 Sunburst Fender Jag. And he just gave it to me. So that is currently at my house, and I'm playing it a lot.
Oh, yeah? Good.
It's a beauty. It's a beautiful guitar.
Man. Oh, that's incredible. My last question of the early days of your learning how to play guitar. What was the first song you learned how to play? Do you remember?
The first one I really sort of sat down and got my fingers around and learned was... There was a few different things. There was a few different kind of basic riffs, like basic kind of 12-bar rock and roll sort of riffs, and then it was Layla.
Oh yeah,
it was Eric Clapton's Layla, and I didn't nail it first time. I'm not like, hey, check me out. Layla was the first thing I was able to play. Like I was
all
not,
14 overdubs.
Right? Yeah, I was no virtuoso, but that was the first one I really sort of sat down and worked out. Following tabs and watching videos and listening. Layla, yeah, that was the guy.
Not a bad first one. Not a bad first one at all.
Love that one. I mean, like I say, it wasn't the first thing. I don't want to sort of sound like some sort of... I learned how to do a few other things that weren't like classic riffs, but the first classic riff was that one for me.
You've been active in the Save Our Venues campaign, which I think is so important. I want to ask you a little about that, what that campaign means to you and how it's going.
It means as much to me as my sort of my arms and legs mean to me. Like I have to have it. I have to. The campaign I have to have because I have to have live shows. You know, I can't. There's really no artist that can fully exist without. It's a vital part of being a touring and recording artist, particularly a touring artist. You know, to try and be the whole 9 yards. And I say that because these days, particularly sort of since 2005, 2010. The kind of online overnight success kind of artist became a reality. And there's lots of different versions of sort of what that is. But, you know, broadly speaking, you can arrive in front of the world via, say, YouTube or something like that with a couple of videos of you doing a nice song, be it original or a cover. And things can really kick off for young debut artists. But you need, at some point, if you want to, like I say, kind of go the whole 9 yards and really sort of be a fully rounded artist, the team that you build around you and develop over time are going to say, okay, let's get you in a space in front of some people, on a stage or in the corner of a bar, whatever. It can be low key, but it's about that live atmosphere, those vibrations, that scenario. That's very different to streaming yourself through YouTube or whatever via a webcam. And you need it. You know, we all need it. For me, it was less about that, even though my journey very much involved a moment where a record label saw a video of me on YouTube. It was a video of me on YouTube playing in a bar to a few people. There's sort of a half-empty bar. The whole slightly depressing, slightly exciting atmosphere that is depicted in those things, I mean, like in real life, not just in YouTube videos, is important. You know, if you can stay afloat in a bar full of people or half full of people who aren't interested, you really learn something, you make some strides. So the act of live performance is vital to me and to all artists, and it's not about getting on a stage in an empty room. It's about having people in that room with you and sharing that experience in the moment. There's nothing like it, and there never will be. And I was lucky recently. We took a baby step from lockdown to I got to go into a venue, an empty venue, and broadcast myself doing a show to as many people as wanted to watch. It was free. But there was a donate button on the screen. And they could watch me play songs to them, but from this completely empty venue on a stage with proper lights and everything. And they could, if they wanted to, donate to the Save Our Venues campaign. We raised on the night, we raised just over £4,000, but it's still going up. So, every little helps. And it was nice to do it. It was nice to be in a real venue. It just sucked that there was no one in there.
It must have felt good at least being back. Yeah, I mean, this whole time it's got to be hard for so many different ways. I mean, especially for a touring musician who wants to get back out there. But has there been any kind of a silver lining of this period for you at all?
I mean, in the UK, the government in the UK said stadiums will be full in October. We were like, okay, tell us more. They were like, no, can't tell you more.
Interesting.
And you're like, okay, what do you mean then? And what they really mean is that's what they're gunning for. That's what they're going for. That's what they're aiming. That's what they're working towards. And everything has to go right between now and then. Silver linings, again, like the next best one after that is really that, agents and promoters are looking at spring 2021 quite realistically as long as progress goes at the rate that it's been happening at, until then. Otherwise, it's tough, because you put more and more people in spaces right next to each other together, breathing on each other, singing at the top of their lungs, etc., etc. We can sort of get into the science of it, but neither of us are scientists. It gets corona difficult eventually, So there's only been so much progress, but of course, behind the scenes, way far away from this conversation, there is sort of scientific progress going on, and we're very, hopeful that brings us live gigs sooner and sooner. Fingers crossed.
My last question, and that's how I always end these episodes. I'm so curious to hear what you have to say. If you could snap your fingers and have lockdown be over, virus is done, everything's completely back to the way it was, what's the first thing you would do? Trips you want to take, people you want to hug?
It's a good question, because you throw people I want to hug into it, and my answer changes from just doing a live show to like, oh yeah, there's some people I probably should hug, and I want to hug. It's not even a specific place. It's just all my loved ones. I go to somewhere with them where, like all of eternity before coronavirus, we didn't have to think twice about leaning on someone's shoulder, throwing an arm around a waist, embracing one another, high-fiving, dancing together. I just that. I just don't have to. I just go to a place where we don't have to think twice about any of those things.
Yeah.
And take me there. That's just where I go. It's nowhere in particular. It's just with all my people. Everyone has their people. It's just with all my people.
That's a beautiful answer, James Bay. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been such a pleasure.
No worries, man. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Oh, you were the best, sir.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Inside the Studio Home Edition, a production of iHeartRadio. For more episodes of Inside the Studio and other shows from iHeartRadio, check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Walter Thompson Hernandez, host of the new podcast, California Love. A show about how the city we love is so much more than meets the eye.
Once you find the hidden secret, it's like, oh, this is here. Oh, you have an oasis.
I hear these birds, man, in the morning, and they're so loud.
All I can say is graffiti did that.
Listen to California Love on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Can robots raise human children and love them as their own? Does mankind's last glimmer of hope lie on other planets? If there is a God, do they have any plans to save us? I'm Holly Fry, and these are just some of the questions posed by the new HBO Max sci-fi series from Ridley Scott, Raised by Wolves. As host of Raised by Wolves, the podcast, I'm speaking with leading authorities in science, tech, and history to understand just how much is actually possible in this mind-blowing series about androids raising the next generation of humanity on a distant planet. We'll chat with astrobiologists about life on other worlds, robotics engineers on the ethical quandaries of AI, and superweapons experts on what the next doomsday device will look like. Stream Raised by Wolves now on HBO Max, and subscribe and listen to Raised by Wolves, the podcast, on the iHeartRadio app, HBO Max, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.